We have a systemic problem and we need a systemic answer. These tech titans don't talk about duty of care enough. Okay, I can do it, but should I do it?
Welcome to The Conversation. On today's episode of Trailblazers, Johnny is speaking to Tim Murdoch, Head of Business Development for Digital at the Cambridge Design Partnership. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on social.
Tim, pleasure to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you are now.
Okay, now a small question for a big answer, possibly. So my name is Tim Murdoch. I look after the digital side at Cambridge Design Partnership. It's a consultancy based in Cambridge, end-to-end innovation engineering, but with a great design element to it. And so in the digital world, I tend to bring that user experience, the user insight, the user behavior, and then try and implement that in products and devices that we use for quite often in the medical world, but across a range of different market sectors. But before that, I have a fairly checkered history. Every sort of 5 or 6 years I change, and I tend to flip between startup world and the consultancy world, where the startup world, you're really connected with the end user, the end proposition. You're having to get involved in all the elements of building a company. And in the consultancy world, actually, you can often have a bigger impact because you're working with these larger brands and larger companies with potentially larger budgets to be able to make more of an impact. And so one of these particular examples was when I was at a previous consultancy, we worked with Vodafone to do a mobile payment system across Africa. And in terms of a sort of leverage for a small number of people working in Cambridge to work with Vodafone who are rolling out mobile payments, it was amazing. And if it was one of those sort of transitionary elements of your life where I was an engineer focused on engineering things, doing hopefully a great job, but suddenly I was in the field in Africa saying, okay, we can have a big impact on people's lives, and using applications, digital applications in particular, complex algorithms to solve really quite basic problems, but at scale, was one of those amazing transition points for me in my life. So ever since then, I've been sort of flipping one or the other, trying to find the same sort of story again.
Yeah, I mean, does that sort of encapsulate the work that Cambridge Design Partnership are helping you achieve at the moment, kind of those smaller scale or smaller focused things that actually have that broader impact?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing with digital particularly is that the amount of data that's being collected, it's being collected on watches, which I've just taken off so we don't interrupt the podcast, or if it's a device that you actually maybe have a chest-based device with a patch, we're collecting loads of information. And actually what we're able to do is look at that data and to start to find out much more about your life, about your person, about what you're doing, about your behaviors. And the thing that blew me away last summer is there was a report done of a group of people that had analysed some of the UK biobank data. And they'd analysed the data from about 9 years ago. And it was data from smartwatches, watch very similar to the one I've taken off. And what that was doing was measuring the acceleration and the movement in someone's wrists. And they analysed the number of people that had been collecting this data. And they were able to identify that 7 years ahead of the normal diagnosis process, they could spot if someone's going to be diagnosed with Parkinson.
Wow. And
that's just acceleration data on your wrist. So for me, the world is just opening up and what we can collect, what we can do, and what the consequences of that. We're almost at the stage of, okay, I can do it, but should I do it? We're almost at that point of being able to do too much. And I will drive absolutely as hard as I can the ability to do it. And then the bigger social question is, okay, what does that mean? And we're sort of on this cusp of digital having this massive impact for how people may choose to live their lives in the future. Do you want to know you're going to get Parkinson's? That's a big question. Though on the other hand, the earlier you know, the earlier you can actually start to mitigate that as a problem. So this is literally, it's the beginning of a massive field of area that we'd love to work in.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. As you say, the question that becomes ahead of time, that do I want to know?
Yeah.
And the data that you're going to be able to collect from devices and things like that, I personally would like to know if I can do something about it.
Yeah.
But I guess the moral question that we also have to address is, what duty of care do we have to people's psychological well-being?
Yeah.
If we, have information, where do we draw the line about, okay, maybe not diagnosing it ahead of time if there is nothing that person can do anything about it or something like that? It's really interesting space to open up with the data side of things and security question that gets thrown around a lot as well.
Yeah.
So what's some of the resistance that you're seeing in those spaces with regards to, okay, we can collect this data, how do we manage, store, and then utilize that in an effective way that's also ethical?
Yeah, no, that's the hardest thing. So you used an important phrase, which I tend to use a lot, which is duty of care. And not enough people understand that or use that phrase. And I think the major pushback we're getting as an industry is these tech titans don't talk about duty of care enough. They're clearly out for maximizing eyeballs on screen and adverts and advertising revenues. They've driven that so hard and so successfully. There is no sort of understanding that actually there is a duty of care. And there are a group of people around the world. I know, because I work in that industry, we care a lot. We care a massive amount, and our decisions are based on duty of care for the client, if we're a consultant, but often actually just the end user. What's the right thing to do for that person, for that experience, not only to maximize the revenue for our clients, but also to look after that person. And I think the biggest resistance is we as an industry have not handled duty of care well. And so the work we were doing in Africa, where we were moving $5, $10 on an SMS message, that was a lot of money for a lot of people. And we spent a vast amount of our time on duty of care. And yet I'd have a direct comparison with what we're seeing, quite frankly, go horribly wrong with the Horizon post office problem, which is appalling. And there was clearly no duty of care in any of the people who were involved in building or running or testing, for goodness sake, that product. And I think that's where the resistance comes from, quite rightly too. If they can look at Horizon and see these things go badly wrong, there is no duty of care for anyone involved, or particularly the postmasters. And that's the issue. So I think our industry has a lot of work to do. And I think it has a lot of work to do because of what we can now do. We can predict whether you're going to get Parkinson's 7 years ahead. We can look after your well-being, mental well-being. There's loads of great things to do there. We can look after your diabetes, type 1, type 2. You can do it. But the industry isn't helping you with your nutrition that would reduce your type 2 diabetes. The advertising industry is all about consumption of high processed foods. It's not about actually eat more green stuff, do more exercise.
Yeah.
And those are the basics. And so our industry is so complex, and the system is such a complex system of systems that we need to think bigger than just someone like me creating a great algorithm that does a great piece of work. We're bigger than that, and we have to find a way to be bigger than that. So it is by no means a simple answer, if I'm honest. And I don't have the answer because it's a systemic problem. And our politicians, it's way beyond them. They can't cope. They have no idea what to do with this because all they care about is getting into power. So we have a systemic problem, and we need a systemic answer. And I'm not quite clear where it's going to come from. I'm an optimist that we'll get there. So a bit like Bill Gates, I am ultimately an optimist that technical thinking, science-based thinking, evidence and truth-based thinking will get there eventually. But I think we'll do a lot of damage in the meantime.
Yeah, there's something you touched on there, both with your background and describing it as a systems problem.
Yeah.
Obviously, user experience design, it involves more than a myopic lens on a problem. You know, as you say, tackling some of these individual issues kind of escapes actually the fact that there is a much bigger thing at play here, which is the ecosystem in which that exists in. How can we use some of the design thinking that we have, obviously as user experience practitioners and with our backgrounds, how can we tackle some of those broader implications and bigger problems using that lens on things? And are there specific roles that you think that designers can play in actually helping move some of these things along and being a more conscientious lens on how we tackle them?
Well, I think there is actually within CDP, I've been championing the concept of a user journey map. So the company and we've been using user journeys for a long time, but these tend to be more user stories and sort of a sequence of nice images that tell a story that basically describe to the execs what they're buying or what they're commissioning. Whereas actually for me, a user journey map is data centric. So you're looking at the touch points for that individual doing that job in that context of what's gone before, what's about to come after. That is a requirement for how I build a device. It's an information. What information am I exchanging with the individual? Are they learning something? Are they giving me something? That defines my information flow. So I've now got not only a physical device requirement, I've now got a data architecture and an information flow and a workflow all sitting within the user journey map, which is focused on solving a user's problems as simply and as beautifully as possible. And it drives everything. It drives the engineering. So I've been driving across the company, but I've been there a year, and pretty much since day one, I've been banging this bell. And I'm actually getting a lot of support because it is so clear to them and to the work that we do around medical regulated devices and products and so on, is that we need to understand requirements. We need that chain of this is a requirement for this reason, and this is how we've solved it. And actually, the user journey map is the Rosetta Stone that brings multiple disciplines together under one set of requirements that actually understands that this is all there to solve that problem for that user at that time. And that, for me, is the way to do it. So bringing service design techniques that really understand user experience, but doing it as a data-orientated way. That, for me, is how I get my engineering background, my mechanical engineering PhD. That's who I am. But it gets my design element, which I'm absolutely all for. So you bring these two bits together, and the worlds can talk to each other. Worlds otherwise don't speak the same language.
Yeah, to put a frame around this, are there particular examples that you can think of where, this has been done badly historically, and then obviously something that's been done well that we can kind of like articulate and put a frame around a description of this type of problem?
Well, I think there are so many examples. That is part of the problem. So I'll pull out some of the good stuff. Unfortunately, it's sort of the government digital services GDS was around until mid-teens, something like that, 2015, something like that. And they massively changed the way that we do our online tax returns and all of those sorts of. You buy a tax for your car. Those processes were simplified. They were simplified because they applied design thinking and data-orientated design thinking to that entire process. They wiped out loads of red tape. They made it really easy. Tax return I did this year was the easiest I've ever done, thank goodness, because I wouldn't have changed a job and all that sort of stuff. But it was extraordinarily easy to do, and they have driven that. Unfortunately, because they were trying to centralise things and get common design thinking across government, that wasn't liked by the individual departments, so that was basically quietly pushed out the way. Unfortunately, it should come back. That is an example of what is good. That is an example of systematic thinking that is positive and good. And the fact that it's gone is a great shame, because that was a huge benefit. The UK was lauded as the leading light in digital services during that period.
Yeah, I mean, that stimulates a question to me about kind of kingdom building and, how do we safeguard against people saying, no, this is my little area and I want to protect that.
Yeah.
That actually doesn't benefit the whole, because it should be about what benefits the whole, as you say.
Yeah, so it's consensus. And consensus, this is the thing that worries me so much, is we're losing the concept of consensus. Consensus is, at the political level, is middle ground politics. It's not left or right, dragging us off the centre piece. Consensus is people not being included in the decision-making process, therefore rejecting what's going on. Consensus is actually multiple disciplines coming together. And so you may have an electronics and a mechanical guy and a digital guy and a design guy coming together to a consensus. Because if you just did one solution, it will be made of paper and be 1 pence, but actually doesn't solve the problem. And actually what you need to do is bring all the solutions together. You need consensus. And I think consensus politics, consensus engineering, all of these things, we need to try and find that again. And we sort of lost it, I think, if I'm honest.
Yeah. That cross-functional team, essentially, that you need to assemble the cognitive diversity that helps solve the problem that is at hand and that you're trying to tackle. That sounds like something that would be a really interesting thing to kind of shift the mindset of a client, per se, that you might be working with.
Yeah.
How closely do you get involved with the teams and the longevity planning, for want of a better term, so that you avoid those types of issues happening with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. So the company started 27 years ago, and it was focused on solving engineering problems, particularly taking relatively easy products or handheld products, take them into manufacture so the client wasn't able to do that. And it sort of it started to grow. So we call it end-to-end because we now have phase 0, which is, okay, why are you doing this? And actually,
it's a question that so many people don't actually ask.
Yeah, absolutely right. So it's very difficult in a conversation with a client, because actually sometimes they come with lots of great thinking, and the last thing you really want to do is say, you thought that. Well, can we go and start over there, which is where you were 6 months ago? That is not you don't get a great reaction if you do that. So it becomes one of really understanding where the client is today and seeing what you can do to help them sort of formulate that thinking. And often they come fully formed. It's great. They understand why they're here. But in many cases, especially when they're dealing with technologies that they don't yet know, and data science is one of those things that can completely change it, you're sort of going back and saying, well, now you know you can do this. Should we go back and just ask the question again? Why are you here? Maybe we could solve a biggest problem. And typically, it's a bigger problem at scale. At a scale that technology is able to deliver now that they weren't ever able to think about before. And that scale of operation, its scale of customer base, its scale of revenue, it's all of these things. And that can drive completely new business models. So all of this thinking, we have to really understand that the empathy that we need for our clients' business is as much for their business as it is for their engineering. And that's really important to who we are.
Yeah. I mean, it's going back to the boiling down of like why we're here is the fundamental question that we always ask as well with our clients in terms of, okay, you have an assumption, for want of a better term, or you have a hypothesis. Can we see if this is the right hypothesis? And we want to test whether that holds water and what the solutions that we might propose later on down the line.
Yeah.
And as you say, oftentimes it does result in a little bit of pushback, a little bit of,
yes, absolutely.
Well, we know our business. Why are you telling us this? And it's like, well, look, hang on a minute. Let's just slow our horses.
Yeah.
There's a question that often gets asked in the military, which is the situation changed?
Yeah.
It's referred to as question 4.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that actually I think is a really important watchword for any project that you're kicking off. Be aware of what data is available to you, what information is available, and then what are the unknown unknowns?
Yes.
What are the things that we may need to come back to identify a possible solution or path forward?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you actually have those discussions with your clients. And first, what's their, when you've gone through the project cycle, as I say afterwards, how do you safeguard against kind of the kingdom building afterwards, the part where you've gone on this journey, you've had this amazing success with them, and you've delivered this solution. As we highlighted before, one of the challenges was with the government digital services. They had this amazing solution, but then it all kind of fell apart afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you have any involvement after that to kind of put those systems in place or help your clients do that and safeguard those solutions long term?
Yeah, so it depends on the relationship we build. So I mean, fundamentally, we're there to help. I mean, our tagline is almost, we're there to help. I mean, end-to-end innovation is our real tagline. But actually, when I talk to them, they say, look, we've got so many skills and so many people who've got industry experience, whether this be starting companies or making complex technical devices for life sciences laboratories, for example. We bring this breadth of understanding. So fundamentally, we're there to help. And it all comes down to the nature of the relationship we've got with our clients. It'd be very easy to have a very transactional relationship. They have a program that they need doing. We put a proposal in. They say, yes, we deliver it. And they say, we'll see you in 2 or 3 years' time when we've got the next problem. And actually, the relationship we often build with our clients is that they trust us to understand them and they trust us to see what next. So we're often just keeping an eye out for technology landscaping, sort of market understanding for benchmarking, for example, keeping an eye out on patents, what's going on with the change of patents, change of seed. So what we're able to do is we're able to maintain long-term support for our clients' business. And those of us within the business who have come from having done startups and gone through that process before, we can spot things happening. We can understand that actually, okay, does the particular proposition that you're asking us to build a solution for, is it going to support the level of engineering expenditure that you're asking us to do?
Yeah.
And actually, we can say, okay, well, maybe if we tweak it a bit and we reduce some of the requirements, because those are the bits that are costly for us to deliver for you, then maybe we've got a different business case, but it is one that we think might work. So having those relationships with our clients is really, really important. But it all stems on we do a good job. And if we do a good job, we get invited back. If we don't, we don't. So we're always focused on that duty of care of doing a good job.
Well, I think that's really important because I had this described to me previously that innovation, particularly in healthcare, for example, often happens in little pockets.
Yep.
And that's great because you have this amazing piece of innovative technology, but then you're left in a situation where you're trying to land a fighter jet on a dirt track in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So I think having that duty of care, having those relationships with your clients, hopefully would ensure that actually you're able to create a situation in which the rollout of a particular solution or innovation that you're working on can be as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, looking at that, boiling it back down to what's the problem we're trying to solve, why are we here? When you eventually get to the solution, how do you then tackle the rollout of that solution? And how do you enable the other moving parts of a system to actually accommodate for the solution that you're rolling out?
Yeah, and that's often the hard bit. So that's often where engineering consultancies like ours tend not to be involved. What we do, and we can, but it tends not to be perfect for our business model because it becomes operational. So it's operational problems for making sure you have the right expertise. You have the right cybersecurity tools in place and people and processes in place. You've got the GDPR, data officer, and all these things are in place. That tends to be where we have helped the customer get to. And then we're then in a sort of more of a mentoring role and helping them to maybe do the next level of iteration. Now, having said that, the exception to that was the work I did with Vodafone, where we were in that role. And I do remember taking calls saying, please help, they've started throwing bricks. And that is, you're operationally involved at that point. When one of your shopkeepers in Kenya is having bricks thrown at his store because he can't give them the cash, because there's a sunspot, so we can't do the data transaction. Actually, that is something we were able to do. And I loved every minute of that, though it was probably the hardest I've ever worked in my life, is supporting a rollout that scales, and that scales very, very fast indeed. So every month we were growing by 42%.
Wow.
Which is basically doubling every 2 months. And this was for the first year period. It was just an extraordinary thing where we had quite a small team. And we were having to support the scale and the growth of this thing. There was eventually, people were getting pay packets and they were sharing their money. And therefore it was just growing. And that was the ratio. And I think that operational experience that I've had then is what I sort of bring now, even if we're not actively involved in rolling out and deploying and supporting the scale. We know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen to your project, Mr. Client, and therefore we really need to prepare for that. So it means that the work that we do to get them to that point, to get them to the point of properly trialing it and piloting it and understanding the end user experience, understanding the things that stop scale, that get in the way of scale, all of the frictions of it being hard to use or being expensive to support. We get rid of all of that because I've been there before. I know how painful it is. So we do that job earlier. And yet we do have the expertise to then support them. But tends to be that the economics don't work to have a consultant sitting in Cambridge, reasonably high day rates, supporting operational things. So actually our role there is a duty of care, is to advise the client to build the teams, and we will hand over and train the teams to help them do that. So again, it's a case of we know what's right for the client's business, and yes, we could stay in that, we could carry on doing that, but it's not who we are, but we can help the client get to a much better place. So again, it's understanding that broad and necessary rollout, which is in many ways is a shame because often real innovation starts to happen when you're rolled out. Real insight starts to happen when you've got the data, you can watch the users. They're telling you, so within a week of rolling out M-Pesa in Nairobi, we had our first merchant. He was selling chocolates and flowers, and he just published his mobile phone number on the internet and said, send me some money via M-Pesa for this and give me your phone number and then do it on the website. He's received the money. He will send chocolates and flowers. That was a week after we launched. So it's extraordinary what the sort of thing can go on. So watching how people then start to use these operational things is where the innovation can really happen. And I think that becomes our role, is sort of rather than getting stuck into the big operational problems where they just need people on the ground to do that, we can start to work with them around further innovation, spotting that user-led innovation, where if you get it right, if you get the original proposition right, you're building a platform. You're not building a solution, you're building a platform where other people will demand, we can do this now, can we do that? And then you can follow on that innovation. And sort of having been through that experience is sort of that every time I now see a problem, I sort of say, okay, well, can we solve it in a way that allows them to scale in not just size, but also in innovation, which is really quite exciting.
That's super exciting. And I love the way that you phrase that, in that if we deliver the solution correctly, we enable you to have a platform from which you can scale. Yeah. It's the launch pad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because ultimately all the work that we do up until that point is laying foundations.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, the mindset shifts to, okay, now we're in the messy middle of the doing of the thing.
Yeah.
This is when we identify innovation. And that's an amazing key takeaway. But I was going to ask if there's any other key or core lessons that you would say, based on the experience that you've had doing that work, that you could kind of like sum up and kind of give back for your lens on things to our audience and people that would be listening from that.
There are so many things. I suppose is probably don't overinvest. Mm-hmm. So solve the one problem you know is going to be the right start point. So identifying that's quite hard. So take time to identify the thing that is the first stepping stone. That actually becomes really important in that process. And so you then invest in solving that problem, but in a manner that you know can scale. So you may actually roll out your initial piece of software, and in 2 years' time, none of that software will be present in the current solution, because what you've done is you solved that problem in a manner that you can then compartmentalize it and replace elements and let them grow. So you get the right architecture. And in particular, the thing that will always persist is your data model, is how you manage the information, how you model that information. Once those gremlins are defined, they will never go away. And so we talk about legacy data systems and this, that, and the other. Fundamentally, it's your data model. If you get your information model right and your semantic model, how you describe things that you and I understand, that level of data model, get that right, things can properly scale. And so I suppose actually coming to it, that's the one thing I would say, get right. If you're talking about a digital system, understand your semantic model and what you're going to do with it, because that will persist. All the software may well change, but that almost certainly will persist.
That's incredible. What are the things that you're most excited about that you're seeing at the moment, opportunity spaces?
Yeah.
I think that what we've touched on here is this kind of having this lens to solve the right problem, provide yourself the platform and then scale. But what are some of the tools that you're seeing? What are some of the most exciting developments that you're seeing that enable that scale currently?
Well, there is the obvious bandwagon, the generative AI. and I absolutely, it is there. And we absolutely must and are doing lots of things with it. But there's also the other side of AI, which is machine learning. So I would describe it as both of those elements. So machine learning is effectively creating a model that describes a behavior in order for you to be able to predict an outcome. You can either identify a feature, or you can predict the next step in someone's actions or in a process. And I think taking what we've been doing recently, we've been working with a number of clients across lots of different industries, actually, both healthcare and also FMCG and consumer goods. We've been looking at the data they've been collecting over the past few years, and we've been actually helping them understand it, helping them restructure it and prepare it for building models, and then building those models. So you can, for example, predict ultimately what the sensory response from a consumer might be if you change your recipe, or if you change your process, or if the weather changes, or if the cohort of people you're looking at actually come from a different part of the world, or have a different background, a social background, and whatever it might be. We can start to use these models to understand. And I think the really exciting thing for me there is that we can probably, over the next few years, help companies encapsulate their brand in a model.
Wow.
So how do you define your company? What is it your company offers your end users? That actually will be encapsulated in a model. And I think the value, the crown jewels for your business will be ultimately understood and described in a way that almost certainly they don't already. There will be some really experienced people who have that in their head, and they've got a really good understanding of that. But being able to try and get that and encapsulate that in a data model that's predictive, boy, is that exciting. Because that allows them to innovate at speed. They can try different ideas. They can try and source ingredients from different parts of the world. And with climate change, you're going to need to. And you're going to be able to predict where people might go with this. And I think not only that, coming back to the duty of care thing, I think nutritionally, we're going to have to change the way we eat.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And so in the consumer world, where you're talking about food stuffs, then I think having a model that understands that is going to be vitally important. So that's the machine learning side, and we're doing loads of data science where we're coming at it from all sorts of different angles and helping the organizations that basically who we might have worked with in packaging before. We're now helping them understand a completely different part of the relationship they have with the consumer. And in the generative AI space, boy, my goodness me, there are so many things we're doing in that space and can be done. I think the thing that excites me most is that you can have a human-like interface in a machine. You can have what is effective. People are responding remarkably well to a bot. If they know it's a bot.
Which I think would surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. But I had a couple of quite difficult phone calls today trying to get into an organization. I'm not going to mention who it was, but they were poor. They were humans at the end, and they were doing. We're about month 3 of a process, and I think people are now beginning to respond well to machines responding. Not only can they be consistent and clear, they conform to policy, they ensure it's fair, They're available quickly. You're not having to wait at the end of a queue. And actually, they can flag the anomalies so that real humans can get properly involved. So ultimately, I think we will see with the generative AI human-like interfaces to lots of different services. And I think that will be transformative of lots of things, including healthcare.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I think I heard the term at the Digital Health World Congress, using digital tools to scale human intervention.
Yeah.
And so seeing, generative AI being used to work on things like brain scans and identify issues with the rugby players that they're doing at the moment, and looking at radiologist scans and picking things up where there's potential. I mean, it just abounds in these spaces, and it's so exciting. Are there any that are off the top of your head particularly exciting for you? I just touched on a couple there, but I think I've got my own lens on this, and I'll comment.
So the thing that I'm really excited by, and I think it's a really big question mark for the way the industry is run, is how consumer tech and regulated health tech are blurring fast. And yet, ultimately, we're not allowed to use consumer tech for diagnosis because it wouldn't be appropriate. It hasn't been approved. Perfectly reasonable. But now I wear a watch, people wear a ring, or whatever it might be. Everyone carries a phone. All of these things collect vast amounts of data. And individually, those data points won't be accurate. But the trend on them is remarkably insightful.
100%.
Absolutely. And so the trend on consumer tech blurring to the absolute values, you would go to your GP to get measured, for example, blood pressure. I mean, you would get a decent measurement on that. There are now cuffs you can go and buy from Boots that will measure your blood pressure. And actually, there are as a ring that you can do that monitors your change in blood pressure. And I think those are really, really powerful techniques. So I think for me, where all of these tools, whether it be wearable devices or complex lab devices, and these generative AI tools come in, is that we can innovate healthcare, because boy, do we need to.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
The economy can never grow fast enough to keep up to the pace of our demand of getting older and eating less well and behaving less well. And ultimately, I think I mentioned it at the conferences, I think we have a social contract. And I think as individuals, we have a social contract. And I think we need to be able to help individuals make better decisions. So behavioural science is really, really important to me, because we need to counter all of the advertising that's going on. We need to make it easier for people to behave better, to look after their element of the social contract. And that's across the social spectrum, because it's very, very hard if you don't have the income to eat well. It's almost impossible to do that. And so we need to solve that problem. And we need to find systemic ways of doing it, not just simply telling people what they could do, because that simply won't work. So for me, I think that the potential that we've got with generative AI and his digital devices is one to support the systemic change that we started the conversation about. It is because we know the politicians can't do it. It's just beyond them, because they just don't think like that. They think in a 5-year horizon maximum. This is a 2030 horizon that we need to think about, which is why climate change is so hard to fix. But we've got a social health problem on that sort of timescale. And I think the thing that really excites me is the information that we're beginning to share, the fact that consumer devices are getting so much better and delivering data in such a more reliable way. It is going to break down the door of medical barriers in order for us to live better. And I think that's really quite exciting.
Yeah, it makes me think about, you've obviously got downward pressure and then upward pressure. And I think we're in a state where we're actually getting a lot of upward pressure.
Yeah.
Because as you've mentioned, I have an Oura ring that tracks my sleep. I wear a Whoop strap that does my heart rate and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And again, actionable insights that hopefully would mean that I can do something with my healthcare longer term. Yeah. I do think that there's a bit of resistance within healthcare systems, which is something else that we'll come on to. I think I'm seeing particularly resistance to change and fear.
Yes.
Those two barriers seem particularly strong amongst clinicians and people in healthcare systems. Is it education? What do you think are the levers that we can pull, hopefully, to start tackling some of that? Because as you say, there is so much benefit that is available to the patient and to the consumer. If only those two worlds could overlap and marry up. If I go to my doctor and I have that 10-minute window for a consultation with them, but they're armed with all of the data from my device, so they can say, yes, Mr. Isaacs, we're seeing this trend in your data. I'd recommend that you do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That's a far better experience for me than, okay, Mr. Isaac, sit down and tell me how your day is. Cool, great. We got those pleasantries out of the way. Now I'm going to have 8 minutes with you to tell you what you can tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And then I'll try and use some discernment to figure that out.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to, unfortunately, the world over has been really bad at commissioning IT systems. So I think there was someone on the BBC last year, a GP, saying that they had to log into 7 different systems during the course of one different 7-minute appointment in order to be able to support the patient properly. So clearly IT systems need to be sorted out. And I think that some of the generative AI will allow those systems integrations to be easier to do. But ultimately, this is change management. So you mentioned radiologists earlier. There's a study, really interesting study, where radiologists and AI tools to be able to help the radiologists identify features in a scan. Actually, the radiologists distrust the AI solution, so they will reject it, and they will come out with a worse outcome than if they embraced it and actually took it on board. That is not a machine problem. That is a human problem. We have a human change management of professionals. So we're short of radiologists. We're desperately short of radiologists. So clearly we need some performance improvement. So the whole productivity, performance, engagement of people, human beings who are radiologists, we need to take them through a change management process. And I think it's interesting actually with a particular client we are talking specifically with them about how we can support them get a change management process through their business in order for the rest of the business to adopt the data modeling and data insight. Because that's the problem. They can do an amazing job at the data modeling side, but it's getting it adopted by the business is the hard bit. So actually our role will be to help them do that change management. So it comes back to behavioural science and change management. That becomes really quite interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not just because obviously the people in a system are part of that system.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting intersection between, okay, yes, we can lay the foundations in terms of the nuts and the bolts and the electronic IT systems, but then we've also got to do a little bit of work on changing the attitudes of the people in there to educate them in order to better adopt. As I said earlier, do you think that comes down to an education piece? What is it that we can, and how much do we need to invest in that? Because to my mind, it seems if you've got a situation where a radiographer is rejecting a solution that can scale their interventions, where you've got less radiographers coming through the training pool as well, then ultimately we're not using digital to scale those human interventions as we should.
Yeah.
So what more do you need to give as evidence to say, look, we're not giving the patient the best? So how do we shift that messaging? How do we change that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So everyone says education. And it's not wrong to educate people. Don't get me wrong. But I do think that actually this is a behavioural change problem, and that's less about formal education and more about making it easy to change. So, I keep on going back to the Impessa example. It was just one of those life-changing things. So we scaled so quickly in that first period because the first time that people interacted with Impessa was receiving money. And what better way to start?
Yeah. Everyone likes getting money.
Absolutely. And we sort of need to have the similar sort of thinking. Change management is about making it easy. So the first time a radiographer gets the advice that they get, then we need to make it such that they can consume that advice, they can use that advice in a way that doesn't undermine them, in a way that does help them out, makes it easier to do their job, and they can be more confident that they've done a better job. So we need to wrap all of our offering into a way that that looks at them as an individual human being. So it comes back to user journey maps again, and user experience. And the radiologists are people; they're human beings. We've got to give them a great experience. And I think that for me is the one lesson, I suppose, in many ways. If we are focused on change management, we need to try and find ways of sort of self-education, of making it easy so that people know that they are getting something that's going to benefit them right off the bat. And if we can get that right, then it scales very fast.
Yeah, and I think that also then puts policymakers under a little bit of pressure as well, in terms of, we've spoken about how governments are struggling to get a grip on this thing and struggling to get an understanding, but then all of this understanding from the upward pressure from the consumer, from the patient, through the system also ultimately puts that pressure to say, look, there is something that is a tidal wave of benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's make the necessary shifts in order to figure out how we use this appropriately, properly, and put policy in place that actually is going to be effective. Because, that's one of the things that I certainly have observed. We had Bletchley Park and we had Rishi sit down with Elon and they had their lovely discussion. But realistically, what's happened since then in effective policy making? Nothing, as far as I can see.
They have the tiger by the tail. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So, I mean, the tiger is out there and it's running, and it won't slow down. Doesn't matter how many people, even Elon Musk himself, trying to slow it down. It ain't going to slow down. It's only going to speed up. And I think that's why it's so exciting. So people like myself who care about building products and solutions using this, we have to make sure we do a good job. We have to make sure that duty of care is there, and we have to make sure that the job we do is beneficial to the people who are using it. Not just our clients making more money, which is obviously why we're in business, but also the people who are then using our clients' services, products and services. That it benefits them, and that's going to be really, really important. And it comes back to adoption again. It comes back to getting around resistance and change management. People need to believe that actually there is a duty of care for that process. And I think to go back to one of the reasons why things aren't being adopted, if you are talking the healthcare world where you have these well-defined patient pathways, a pathway of a patient going through, and they're a particular stage in that pathway because of the diagnosis and the current position of the disease, and it's being managed in a particular way, and that defines a pathway. Now, we can't change the entire system, the entire pathway in one go and just give it a new one. It's going to get rejected out of hand, quite rightly too. But what we have to be able to do is to be able to look at different points on the pathway and slowly improve it. But again, it comes back to the semantic model, to improve it in a manner that allows us to build that platform for rattling through the broader pathway. And I think having tools that address particular pain points in ways that are beneficial, that leads change incrementally, and just every year. So Warren Buffett describes compound interest as the most the strongest force in the universe, fundamentally. And that's what we need. We sort of need some continual, ongoing, incremental benefit and change at the small level, but with a big picture understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's where change will come. And I think that's what AI and generative AI allows us to do, actually, because it allows change to be relatively quick to implement because of the tools and techniques out there. It allows the broader system to be well modeled so that you could change one thing and understand the impact on the broader system. And I think understanding it from the fundamental data science, so that we're evidence-based and we've got a great model and we go and collect the right information and we have tools to identify what information we need to collect. And then we can look at one change and can see how it affects the whole. That's really exciting. But again, I come back to data science being the thing. I mean, I really do. It's just sort of use it well, we can make a big difference. Yeah.
So being pragmatic, if you were to look at this on a short, medium, long-term time horizon, what do we need to do on those three in order to get to where we've got this positive situation for patients, where we've addressed some of these issues in healthcare systems and actually gotten the adoption that we need?
Yeah, so we've been working with the CPI, a government body, and to actually look at digital health. It's one of the reasons, one of the talks I gave recently. And I think we basically trying to come up with things that they need to do. And clearly there is an understanding of the broader perspective of what we're trying to do, and getting people to understand what what can be done with digital health, but also make sure that we understand the data, the information that's available. The NHS has a great source of data. It is not one single organisation. It is massively fragmented, whatever we think about it. But in a way that actually means that individuals can make good decisions. So what we need to do at a system sort of country level is give permission for the individual trusts to be able to manage data in the right way for the benefit of patients. And at the moment, they're beginning to do that. There are some trusted trusts who are able to manage data in a particular way. But we need to give them more examples, more permission, and work with them to further the use of that data. There is a perfectly natural sort of resistance to working with some of these large Googles of the world to share NHS data with. We've seen how that's gone badly in the past. But I think we've got some amazing universities in this country, absolutely across the land. And I think what we need to be able to do is to be able to engage with that information, bring some of the science, some of the academics in there. They bring rigor, they bring independence, and they fundamentally will allow us to make massive differences. Now, moving from academia to scale, we need industry. So it's managing that transition. So So relationships between academia and large industries in the healthcare sector to be able to then take on these ideas is really important. But I think allowing the academics to come in and actually have a much bigger say, funding them well, and actually it's interesting, they have provided, I think it was £100 million recently, specifically targeted at academic institutions for the movement of digital health. And I think that's a great, really good thing to do. Possibly just a drop in the ocean. We probably need a lot more than that.
We do.
But actually then allowing them to support great relationships with industry to go on from there. So we recently hosted actually around the IVD space. So we hosted a number of universities, a number of large pharmaceutical companies coming together, and we did a speed dating service at our CDP offices up in Cambridge, where we encouraged them to work with each other to bring out this great academic IP, share it with the right companies, and actually maybe to be able to sort of fulfill some of that amazing thinking. So we are actively involved in trying to make it happen at various different levels, not just working with an individual client to do an individual thing. Actually, this is a community level thing because it's consensus and it's systemic, and these things are hard to do. But I think we've had a tremendous amount of support for that initiative actually, and that's gone really well for what we've been doing.
That's incredible. And I think that leads me quite nicely into asking your vision. Okay, so we address all of the things that we've discussed and this amazing work that you're doing now. What's the broad vision for yourself when we sort all of this stuff out? Where do you think it can take us?
So is it utopia? I don't think it'll ever be utopia. And I at a society level, I worry that we're going to go through it down before we have a sunny uplands, if I'm honest. I think democracy is a problem. And I think the biggest problem we need to solve is our democracy. And it's broken. There's no doubt about it. And people are disengaged. They're not engaging properly, which allows the extremes to have the role. And our journalism is poor because it plays to the extremes. It doesn't play to the middle ground. And BBC's balance is one extreme against the other extreme, whereas 90% of the people are in the middle. Please, we've been ignored for too long. So I think we will have we'll have to go through that, and we'll have to fix the way that our society works with each other, fix our democracy, fix the big society that David Cameron tried to talk about, and he didn't really understand what it was, or no one really understood what he was on about. We've got to solve that problem again. We need to look after each other, and I think COVID, interestingly, triggered a lot of that. Certainly in our village, we're a much stronger relationship across the village than we ever were before COVID. And I think that's been really positive, absolutely positive. And I think if we fix that, then I think we can see some of the technologies having a massive impact. I think people will accept and will adopt digital services because they will begin to realize if we properly regulate the companies doing it and look after it properly, then it can be trusted to deliver the right services. I will be so much better off as a consequence. And if we really look at consensus, then we really will look after the full element of society, not just the people who aspire to earn millions of pounds. We'll actually be able to look after everyone and give them a healthy lifestyle. So my vision is that we are able to bring everyone up in a way as healthy as we possibly can, give them the access to opportunities they can. And we can do it through some of these technologies. But I think we have to fix the society piece first.
Well, I think that's something for another episode, because we could get into the muck and the mire on figuring that one out.
Absolutely.
Tim, if people want to find you and learn more about what it is that you're doing and get involved, where can they find you? Where should they go?
Well, look, you find me on LinkedIn. I'm there, and it's so Tim Murdoch on LinkedIn is absolutely the right thing to do. Or come to CDP. So CDP, Cambridge Design Partnership, you'll find me there. Very happy to talk. There's always things going on. One of the things I loved about joining CDP about a year ago is I've been dropped in some of the brightest people on the planet, and it's just amazing. And I love that interaction. We've got loads of great people there. We'd love to speak to you.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining, sir, and looking forward to that next discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony.